So we are going to get started. During our typical morning meeting, in addition to information about our organization, we also just like to share recommendations about restaurants and fun things that people can do in the evenings when they're not taking our courses. Obviously, we're not going to make those types of recommendations today because we can't be together in person. But we did decide to start our panel discussion with something fun that we could share with you that you might be able to do outside of today's learning experience. So to start our panel discussion, I wanted to ask our panelists, now that the school year has finished for most of you and you have just started vacation or are getting ready to begin vacation, what suggestion might you have of something to read over the vacation? It could be something educational, but it also could be something fun. And if you haven't had an opportunity to read anything recently because you have been teaching, what's something that maybe is on your reading list for vacation? And let's see, Linda, can we start with you?
Sure, thanks. I've just started reading Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram Kendi. As an American, I'm trying to make sense of what's happening right now in the States, and I'm only about 25 pages in, and it's been absolutely fascinating, and I've learned a lot. So that's what I'm reading right now, and I've also got a few other books that a few teachers at ISB are reading, and we're going to have some Zoom book clubs over the holiday to make sure that we are skilled up and have a better understanding of how we can help everyone in the States and help our kids understand as well, because we're all starting to have these very interesting conversations about our place in international schools and in these international settings. So that's what I'm reading right now, and it's been fascinating.
I have just received a book called Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath, and it is about why some ideas take hold and other ideas come kind of unstuck. So it's been recommended by someone who reads a lot. I'm sure it's going to be great and sounds fascinating.
Great, thank you. Jen, how about you?
So we finish, one of the things I do at the end of the year is meet with IB diploma teachers, everyone that teaches literature, and talk about where we're going with starting the grade 11 kids in their first books that they're going to be reading. So I try to read along with the kids. And I'm rereading the book Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi right now, which I really like because it's a graphic text. If you haven't read it yet, it covers her sort of a memoir of her life growing up in Iran during the kind of Cultural Revolution and some of her experiences, both with what was going on politically as well as her identity as a woman. So a really, really fascinating text and sort of a nice break from very word-heavy text to be able to have something that brings both imagery and language together.
Thank you. Crystal, thank you for joining us after getting off an international flight. Have you had time to even think about a summer reading list yet for yourself?
Yeah, actually I have. I just finished up some coursework this semester, and there's a few books that I'd like to read again and actually just get a little bit more in depth with it. And one of the books that we had on the course was called Brain Targeted Teaching by Marielle Hardiman, and it really looks at 6 different areas for both teaching and learning, and getting a little bit more of an in-depth understanding of when we're planning for our students and considering the cultural, the emotional climate, the physical environment, evaluating learning, just some really thoughtful ways to approach students from kind of a cognitive perspective, and then how do we adapt our instruction to make sure we're meeting their needs.
Fantastic, thank you. And Liz, do you have a recommendation for us?
Sorry, I lost my video for a second there. Yes, I do. I am currently, as you can see from the hotel room behind me, which I'm having lighting issues with now, on a family road trip. And we have a tradition when we're on a family road trip of actually listening to a book, The Watsons Go to Birmingham, 1963, which is by Christopher Paul Curtis, and the audiobook is read by LeVar Burton. We are on probably our 10th listen as a family, and it holds up just as well. And it also happens right now to be very timely and a great jumping off point for talking to younger students about issues about race in America. But if you have not listened to it, I strongly recommend it.
Fantastic, thank you. All right, so the first question that people were curious about, which is a really good question and one I hear asked often, is how strictly should we hold students with special needs to grade level standards? And Kristen, I was wondering if you could start us off with some thoughts on that question.
Sure, it's a great question, and one of the things I worry about actually in answering it is answering it briefly and being cautious about the message that goes out about it. Of course, we want to be working towards standards for students and holding them accountable and making sure that they're sufficiently high so that students can reach them. We also know that, and we're learning that students learn differently from each other, and the whole idea of average is really coming into question. So what are the expectations for a reading level at a certain age for a student is kind of the standard of how we've operated in schools. And we know that along developmental continuums, we can see kids who are, for example, not speaking in single words, and we begin to worry because it's not what's expected at this time. And then a little while later, they come out with a whole sentence. So it's about holding the tension between what we know and the standards that we set that we want to keep high enough, and accepting that kids are different and they learn at different rates and in different ways, and the progress that they make within that is also a data point to track. So in a short answer, it is I think the big idea is to hold those tensions between holding them accountable, keeping the standards high, and managing, and I think we'll talk about this in one of the later questions, but keeping data on where they have come from, how they learn, and what their progress has been as an individual.
Does anybody else would like to add on to what Kristen has said?
Sure. The only thing I would like to add to that, and I think, Kristen, you've captured it really well, is sometimes we get a little bit caught in whether it's a numerical or, a grade way of reporting out on how students perform. And I think making sure that we do manage that balance and being able to report on how children learn, and using those standards and guides to say, okay, this is what they're able to do and this is what they're striving to achieve next. And making sure that with those targeted interventions, we are, as Kristen said, just keeping those data points, and in those narrative responses, just capturing the breadth of what they're learning, as well as that in-depth picture of the quality of what they're learning.
Another question that people were really curious about, especially because this course in particular is designed for people who are teaching in the classroom. And so people were wondering, like, how do I get teachers on board with co-teaching? It's something that sounds like a nice idea, but it can be difficult to try to get into practice. And so, Linda, I was wondering if you might be able to start us off with some thinking about that question.
Sure, thanks. Co-teaching, just for definition, right now I think of co-teaching as you have a homeroom or a self-contained class, and then you have someone who comes in to support a certain group of students or help with the whole group. And then team teaching, at least in my context, is where we have 2 homeroom teachers, 2 classes, and then sometimes a co-teacher coming in targeted to work with kids with special needs, or kids who are learning English as their second language or third language. So with both of those, team teaching and co-teaching, I think really a big part of it is state of mind and flexibility, and knowing that you can come in and learn and work in different ways. And sometimes that can be a big shift for people, especially if they are used to having a lot of control, or these are my students, and making that shift from my to ours can be can be a bit of a shift, but I think it's one that we can think about and make in our mind. And it just, once we have that flexibility of state of mind, it makes it a lot easier. Another thing I think that's really, really important is trust, right? And building that relationship with all the teachers in the room. Right now in our context, we've got 2 homeroom teachers, a co-teacher who's a language support teacher, and 2 IAs who are absolutely amazing. So we have a lot of adults that are together in the same space all the time. So having that trust and getting to know each other. What are you into? Are you really into workshop? Are you really passionate about phonics, right? And even small little things like, is it okay if I text you on the weekends? Should we have a group, or how are we going to best communicate, right? And then another thing I was thinking about that is very helpful, right, is just admin support, right? If admin has clear and common guidelines, like at this school, we believe that that all the co-teachers are in the homeroom class with students. That's very supportive. That's very helpful. If people are, when they're hired, they're told this is an expectation, you know, that you are going to be a co-teacher or a team teacher, you're going to work together and collaborate. And then of course things like having that planning time and just those expectations that you're all going to work together. So those are some things that I think about a lot in supporting co-teaching structures.
Great suggestions, Linda. Does anybody else have anything that they want to add to that?
Yes, I would like to add. Thank you, Linda, for that. It is one of the, in my experience, what teachers have really wanted is to feel like they're competent and feel like they're clear about what the expectations are going in when they're sharing responsibility for kids and sharing space and all of that. So in terms of what Linda was talking about, in terms of developing that relationship and establishing those norms, it's not something that can kind of happen. It is something that can happen organically. It's better when it is done up front, and those conversations are had before school even starts, because you can avoid, you know, coming into a situation where people feel like they you know, they weren't sure how that was going to go, and so it's really helpful to be proactive about that. And the other point that I might add is that when co-teachers are really excited and they share their stories about being really excited, other teachers are going to want that. They're going to want to do that as well, because it feels really good when there's ongoing learning. So just sharing the stories of excitement about it will generate a lot of positive energy toward it.
Great, thanks, Kristen. Another question that people were wondering about, and I'm going to put a little twist on this question as well, because I'm seeing a lot of questions on the Q&A come in around how do we do some of these things virtually, is what are some of the best ways to monitor and document students' progress towards their goals, and what might that look like in a virtual environment? Does that look different in a virtual environment than it does in the classroom? What are some things that maybe you've learned over this past semester, in addition to your wealth of knowledge about documenting progress towards goals for students, that you could share with everyone? And I don't know who wants to start on this. Maybe Liz or Crystal? Liz? Oh no, I can't hear you, Liz.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, yeah.
Okay. So I think, you know, progress monitoring is always something that's really important. And I think this is a really important question, and it's an important question to ask yourself as you're designing interventions and as you're writing goals, because you want to make sure that you're thinking about how you're going to document progress as you're designing an intervention. You know, I think when it comes to monitoring progress in a virtual environment, for me, you know, it presents many of the same challenges, honestly, as having a very large caseload, which was something I was already dealing with before we went online. And, you know, I think one of the things that's been really helpful for me with that is making sure that, I mean, I work with older students, so making sure that students are involved with their own progress monitoring. And when we're working on progress, when I'm collecting data on student progress, that's something that I'm doing together with students. So we actually set aside time to work one-on-one, and, you know, if something we're working on is a writing strategy, we can talk about like, oh, what writing work have you had this week? Let's pull that together and look at it and see what of that work is meeting our, you know, is meeting your goal, or how many of these type of sentences were you able to include. So that's one really important thing. You know, I think another really important thing about progress monitoring is making sure that you are working with your team, with your classroom teachers, with your students, to put together a plan that isn't just yours. And I think, you know, the book we read for this PTC course was Causes and Cures in the Classroom, and that has a ton of information about designing interventions and tracking progress.
Thanks, Liz. I would also add, I think,
Crystal has frozen.
oh, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. That I think, just like Liz said, that you're working together with your whole team, and that it's not just the learner support teacher or co-teacher that happens to be reporting out or gathering that specific data, but everybody's getting it from different perspectives, so that you're collecting it in one place and we're seeing it from different areas. Things like learning behaviors, you know, what does that look like online? Making sure that, okay, if you're going to capture data on performance, that we provide more opportunities than maybe written feedback, and that they can do it on a video, that they can show their learning in a range of ways. And so again, similar to being face-to-face, just making sure that we have lots of ways of gathering data, that we are consistent and systematic in collecting that data, and then making sure that we're making decisions together as a team, so that we know that we are really just capturing each student where they are and making sure they're progressing.
Thank you. And I'm going to close with one final question to the panel before we transition into a resource share and then our nugget of knowledge. And this last question is specifically related to distance learning. So how does distance learning change teaching strategies for students with special needs? And Jen, I was going to see if we might be able to start with you.
Yeah, I think one of the things that probably many people who are on this session right now came to the realization is that for all of us that were teaching during this time, we've changed our strategies for all of our students. And I think having a moment to pause and sort of not abandon past practices, I think actually really clarify the intentionality of some practices. What are the things that make the culture and climate of a classroom valuable and safe for kids? How do they find connection points? And how might we rethink some of our face-to-face structures to actually invite more participation for students? So one of the things that I know in our school we had many conversations about was actually for some of our students, particularly ones who are in the process of learning English, having a chance to engage in a different format, in a different medium, maybe typing instead of having to speak right away in class, or having smaller breakout sessions where they have a chance to meet in a small group, really made their participation go up. And I think along with that, one of the things that I noticed about myself was that things that I would normally be doing, things like conferences in class, one-on-one conversations, I was still doing those and scheduling them, and then they were recorded. So I had many students who the framing of that conference wasn't about me as the teacher walking away with my notes and maybe one or two walk-away questions for the student, actually that child walking away with a record of that conversation. So for many of our students, that opportunity to go back and either re-engage with that single dialogue or watch the video of a class again, be able to reconnect to the materials and resources. I think, one of the things that we talk about in this course is that differentiation for everyone, that everyone is entitled to that opportunity for personalization. And for students with identified needs, for students who are getting additional support, being able to really tailor and record those engagements and interactions gave classroom teachers an opportunity to connect in different ways, gave that partnership with learning support teachers a different way to form and be planned. And then for students, they really got a much more dynamic and in some cases richer experience because of that record of what that learning experience was.
Great, thank you. Linda, did you have some things that you wanted to add to that as well? I'm curious how team teaching may have transformed in your virtual learning experience.
Yeah, well, it was really interesting with the team teaching because we were able to keep up with the groupings, right? And we couldn't change them as quickly as we do, when we're in the same physical space, because our kids are 7 and 8, right? And so it's actually very hard. Their parents have to manage all these Zoom schedules and calls and things, so we couldn't change as much. But we were able to pretty quickly get into some, groups based on, the data and what the kids needed, which was really, really helpful. And yeah, I agree with Jen, like just being forced to use the technology really brought out some different things and made us really notice some things about kids, right? We had some learners that we were like, wow, I didn't realize you had this sense of humor. It was a lot of the shy, quiet kids. And when they were able to share their thinking in a different format, usually, like a video recording, it was really, really powerful. So it's, we're sort of walking away with this thinking, how can we keep up with that even when we're back in the same physical space, just giving kids different opportunities and different ways to share and how they're learning.
Great, thank you. I apologize for my dogs barking in the background. Excuse me for life. Okay, so we are going to transition now into a resource share. We wanted everybody who is with us today to be able to walk away with some tools that you might be able to use to fine-tune your practice or maybe try something new. And so each of our panelists has come up with sort of one of their favorite things or something that has helped them in their practice. And I'm going to have each person just give a brief overview of what they're going to be sharing, and then I will email the links with these resources to you when this session ends. So maybe Jen, can we start with you?
Yes, I wasn't ready because I had my mute on still, sorry. One of the piece that I chose is actually a piece of research around building inclusive cultures. And I was drawn to sharing this because for research, it has some really practical suggestions for how to actually go about leading and building inclusive cultures. And for many people that have taken this class in the past few years, one of the things that they've mentioned is the desire to really give some evidence back to their school about why becoming more inclusive and really more intentional about the value of diverse learning communities is such an important thing to move forward. So hopefully this will be a resource to be able to be used by the participants as well as maybe shared with principals or grade level teams to also help from a kind of a leadership level to instill those cultures.
Fantastic, thanks Jen. Kristen, what do you have for us today?
I have a book that I am just finishing called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, which has been on my pile of books for a few years now, and I finally have had the courage to read it. I'm reading it really for personal reasons, thinking about some habits that I would like to shift in my life. And the resource really is the cycle that he talks about. It's cue, routine, reward. And you can see it, he gives lots of different examples of it. And you can use it in your personal life. He talks about it in organizations and certainly in teaching. There are tons of applications for it. And I think it's really easy to go through life and keep going with habits that you've always done. And it's nice to know that you absolutely can break them when you recognize that cycle and remake new ones. And I think for kids, for learning, there are huge implications, and also lots of connections with kind of behavioral science. So it's a great book for teachers.
Great, thanks, Kristen. Linda, could you tell us a little bit about the resource that you have?
Sure, thanks. I just put together a Way CLIT, and that's just a collection of some online links. And it's actually my team teaching partner, Ed Hagen, and I had put it together. And what's mostly in the Way CLIT now for you all is just some practical resources about how to build relationships with co-teachers, some different models for co-teaching, right? I think knowing and understanding different models, like it doesn't always have to look one way. There's different ways that co-teaching and team teaching can look, can help people feel a little bit more comfortable and sort of access a different way of working. There's the rubric by the Powells is in there to help you and your co-teacher sit down and kind of find out where your strengths are and how you can grow a bit, and just some other small little resources in there to help build those relationships.
Great, thank you, Linda. And Liz, could you tell us a little bit about your resource?
Sorry, battling with my mute button there. The resource that I chose was one actually that came from the special needs course that I've found incredibly helpful during the online learning as a tool to work with teachers to address some of the issues that Jen was actually talking about with needing to mix up the format of our instruction to help students who learn differently. And there's actually, I have a number of websites like this, but this one is the most sort of user-friendly for teachers, which is the thinking routines from Think from the Middle, which is really helpful, has been really helpful in rethinking, like, how can we use Zoom and Zoom breakout rooms in different ways to engage kids, students in general, in different patterns of thinking and learning, and scaffold their thinking, even though they may learn differently from each other.
Great, thanks, Liz. And Crystal.
Sure. I'm only going to give a little plug for the book that I mentioned in the beginning, where there is one of the brain targets that they start with that talks about creating an emotional climate, and just thinking about everything that's going on right now all over the world. It gives some really tangible opportunities to think about how and why is it important to ensure that kids are feeling positive, and when there's so much inconsistency, and trying to manage those polarities between creating a consistent expectations when there is so much inconsistency and uncertainty. And so just some really thoughtful pieces. And then one other one that's just a concrete one that has been helpful both in person and online is using this project management tool called Trello. And it's actually been really useful. We've adapted it and tweaked it to make it as a place where teachers can come together and put information in on how students are, how they're doing, especially in secondary school where there's so many different subject teachers, and they can provide updates. You can link in emails, and it just helps to just take one step away of trying to add another meeting, but still provide really relevant updates on how a child is doing.
Great, thank you so much. So as we're coming to the end of our session today, at the TTC, we have a tradition, and it's called the Nugget of Knowledge. And we typically end our morning meetings with a nugget of knowledge that is given by one of our participants. And since we can't be together in a course this year, we've asked our trainers of the course to provide a nugget of knowledge for us. So Jen and Kristen will be providing our nugget of knowledge today, and I'm going to turn it over to both of you.
Okay, I think Kristen, you're still muted. Maybe you can unmute. So if you want to chime in, we can tag team on it. So one of the things that is a part of this nugget is a practical takeaway. Before we get to that, one of the things that has been a real present theme in the comments that have come from everyone on the panel today is how important it is to create a community in which all learners are valued. And I think we've spent a lot of this time talking about what teachers can do to do that. And I think what we want to share with you is a reminder of the implications for kids when this is the culture that's created. So in our school, we have exit interviews with our grade 12 students before they graduate. And I have a chance to sit in on many of those. And this year I listened to students talk about when they're asked, what are the things that you really will take away from your time at the school? A theme that every kid talks about in some way is the diversity and the sort of experience of how rich that's been for them as learners. One student in particular spoke about how she now wants to go into speech language pathology because of being a student at Hong Kong Academy, because of getting to talk with the speech language pathologist, to be able to have an opportunity to engage with not just adults, also with classmates who are benefiting from that program and really actually seeing the intersection between what learning is and what socialization is in an authentically diverse world. So when we think about what we try and go out and do as teachers and try to build capacity for kids, it's really an important reminder for us that actually that's what the kids are taking away with them. And the more that we elevate the value of everyone's identity being in an inclusive community, we don't only validate it and elevate it for adults, we also validate and elevate that for kids as well. So it's a really important reminder for us. And Kristen's going to give you a structure that we thought might be useful to actually go out and actively develop that again with adults so that we really see that transfer of what that community can create for kids too.
So now more than ever, we need to be really focused on what is important to us, and to be flexible in our thinking about how we're going to serve kids diversely and be really proactive and upfront about that. So we have chosen for the nugget today to use some three focusing questions that come to us from the adaptive schools. And in terms of at the beginning of next school year, when you're together with your colleagues, whether it's a team that is used to working together or whether there are new people that have joined your team, what are some structures this is a structure that you can use to be proactive in that thinking about how you'll serve a diverse group of learners. So it's framed around 3 questions. And I know this is a low-tech presentation, but I have made some handy cards because I can't help myself. I must offer something visual. So the first question is, who are we? And this speaks to what are the beliefs and values of the group? What really drives you to do what you do? What's important to you? The second question is, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? What are our intentions? What is the purpose of this thing that we're doing? Because that will help you make your decisions and know you're on the right track. And the final question is, speaking of habits earlier, why are we doing this way? So it helps to kind of break maybe some mental models that we have of, or just being stuck in a habit that may or may not be serving well. So why are we doing this way? Helps to be flexible in thinking and explore other ideas.
Great. Thank you so much to Kristen and